I want to have this call is because I don't want you guys to be scared. We're 3 months into this in the medical world, and we understand this disease. And so I'm going to go through kind of ways to protect your family, and then what to do if and when, given the size of this call, it's a when, someone gets COVID, and how we can protect our circle. You may hear a little inflection in my voice, like I'm emotional. It's not because I'm scared. It's actually the opposite. For the first time in a while, I'm actually not scared. And so I'm going to share with you why that is. So just a quick introduction as to what's going on in New York. I work at probably the premier hospital in New York City. It is a 1,200 bed hospital. We do everything from surgery to transplants, lung transplants, heart transplants. At this point, we do none of that. Almost none of that. Our hospital is almost exclusively a COVID-19 hospital. And so people enter through a secure gate in the front, where in the past, what I've been doing is seeing old people with pneumonias or seeing people with bleeds. Almost exclusively what I do all day long is see people with COVID-19. But we're learning, and we know a lot. And what I want you guys to know is that every single day we're getting better. We know more. And I am confident that the stuff I can tell you today should make you guys feel like when this comes to your community, that you don't have to be scared and that you can protect your family. What is COVID-19? I mean, it's now every single news story. It's political, it's economic, but what is this disease? So this is a virus. It's from what we would colloquially think of as a common cold family, the coronavirus family. But what's unique is that the human body has never seen this virus before. And so this obviously started in Wuhan. The thought is that it came probably from an animal and then made its way into the human body for the first time. And so one of the common questions I get is, what does this disease look like? And so what commonly people have is they have fever, and they have cough, and then they have sore throat. And when they get this, the virus goes through their entire body. And what we have found is that the most likely place that this will affect is your lungs. And so people will commonly have cough. But for about 80% of people, you just don't feel good is the most common thing. You have a mild cough, maybe you have a little headache. The disease lasts, from what we're seeing, between 5 to 7 to 14 days is probably the best accurate description. Some people who have a mild disease, by about day 5, are starting to feel better. And then people who aren't feeling better usually start to get short of breath around day 3 to 5, and then start to feel better around that 7-day mark. And so what is the first kind of big topic we're going to talk about? And I think the reason I wanted to have this call is how to protect your family. And I think we've learned a lot, and I want to kind of share all the stuff that I've learned so far with you guys. So I think the first thing is, how do you get COVID? And I think that this is really important, and we've really learned a lot over the last couple of weeks to months about how you get this disease. And so the overarching theme is sustained contact with someone who has this disease, which the vast majority is people with fever and aches, or someone who is about to get the disease. So someone in the next 1 to 2 days who is going to develop symptoms of this disease. And so the way that you get this is the transmission of the virus almost exclusively from your hands to your face. From your hands to your face. And so it's either into your eyes, into your nose, or into your mouth. So there's a lot of talk about contact or getting it through contact, hands to face. There's also a small thought that it can be aerosolized, that it can kind of exist a little bit in the air. The thought at this point is that you actually have to have very long, sustained contact with someone. And I'm talking about over 15 to 30 minutes in an unprotected environment, meaning you're in a very closed room without any type of mask, for you to get it that way. But to very simply state, the overwhelming majority of people are getting this by physically touching someone who has this disease or will develop it in the next 1 to 2 days, and then touching their face. Statement of fact, COVID is in your community. That is not to scare you. That is to just tell you so that you can then take the steps that I'm talking about and not be scared. So the first step, which I think is incredibly clear, is to become a hand Nazi. Know where your hands are and know that they're clean at all times. So very simply, for what this means for me in the city is that I walk around with Purell. So when I leave my apartment, everything that I see that I'm going to touch, I make sure that I Purell first. So when I leave my apartment door and I go to the elevator, it's okay that if I touch it with my hand, but then I Purell it. When I go downstairs and I open the door, it's okay to touch the door. You can open it with your elbow, but if you touch the door, then I make sure to Purell it. So we know that if you keep your hands clean, that you're not going to get this. The second point is that this is not a disease that we're getting because someone is sick and touched something, and then an entire community of 10 people get it because they touched that. It's mostly from sustained contact with people who have COVID-19. Out of abundance of caution, we also make sure that everything we touch, we're cleaning our hands. So that's the first thing, is become a hand Nazi. Everything you know about your hands, just keep them clean and you will not get this disease. The second thing is you have to start psychologically working on the connection between your hands and your face. So I'm terrible at this. I touch my face all the time, literally all the time. You don't even realize it. You move your hand, you scratch your nose. And so the virus has taken advantage of this. And the reason why everyone gets this disease is because you have sustained contact with someone. So someone at a party has this and you shake their hand, right? And then you touch your face. It's that simple. That is how you get this disease. So what does that mean? I think there's two practical things that you can do. One is just to start to be aware of when you touch your face. Atul Gawande, who is a Harvard-trained surgeon, I think is very famous, actually has a recommendation for people to just start wearing masks. And the idea here is not that the mask is going to prevent you from getting COVID, because as I said, it's not a disease that you're most likely getting from the air. But the reason to put on a mask is because, and I do this in the hospital, is you stop touching your face. And so what I would recommend is now when you're leaving your house is to wear a mask. And I think those two things combined is incredibly powerful and will prevent the transmission of the disease into your family in 99% of cases. To know your hands are clean and to not touch your face, period. There are going to be an obscure 0.01% of patients who get it and will just never know. But I think for you, that is an incredibly important way to protect yourself. 3, you don't need a medical mask. You don't need a medical mask. These masks that people are wearing are not protecting them from getting the disease. And front care healthline workers need these masks right now. That's not to say don't wear a medical mask. If you have one, that's great, put it on. But it doesn't mean you have to have a wild supply of masks or N95s or anything like that. The general community has zero need for an N95 mask, zero. In the hospital, where all I do is take care of patients with COVID-19, I only wear a mask, of N95 mask, if I'm in the room with that patient doing something that's going to make them have aerosolization of the virus. That is no one in the community. You don't have to be scared of the outside world now. You don't have to be scared of your neighbor. And I have actually found that to be incredibly liberating right now. So in New York City, we're receiving food from delivery men. We have to go outside to the grocery store. Um, it's a time when we're all really scared. And I think it's what makes it worse is to when you go outside and to look and think that the person next to you is going to somehow harm you or harm your family. But when you know that the only way you're going to get this disease is if your hands are dirty, and that if you touch your face, and that if you are way too close to that person, that becomes incredibly liberating. And then all of a sudden, the person at the store is not your enemy. There's someone who's going through this with you. The delivery person is not your enemy. They're a hero. They're going out and delivering food at a time when there's a communicable disease that they don't understand. The mailman is a hero. You know, these are people that we have to, the same way we're acknowledging and celebrating healthcare providers, when you understand this disease and know exactly what to do to prevent getting it, then it allows us for the next couple of weeks to months to be able to sustain the system that we have. We have to be able to have mail. We have to be able to get delivery and seamless in New York City. It's the only way we eat. But if you can protect yourself and you know your family's safe, then I think that's empowering. Socially, this is incredibly important, and we did this at my mom's house, is you have to shrink your social circle. I would highly encourage you guys to do as the country is shutting down, is find your isolation group, find your group of 3 people, 4 people, your family, and set boundaries. That is it. The people who are going to get this are people who are maintaining large social circles at this point. So one thing that I want to talk about is something that is inevitable in a group chat that's this large, which is, what do you do if you get this disease? And this is, I think, if you listen to nothing else through this entire thing, just please listen to this part. In Wuhan, China, throughout the world, the vast majority of spread of COVID-19 is through home and family transmission. It's incredibly scary, but it's also something that, if you understand the rules, is incredibly empowering. So what do? If you develop a fever and you are otherwise fine, isolate yourself from your family. So what are people recommending? If you're able, have the person in a separate room. If you're able, have the person who's sick have their own bathroom. If the person has to come out and interact with people in the family, this is a perfect indication for one medical mask. And the reason is you want to put the mask on the person who's sick. And so if in our apartment, if I was sick and I had to come out and interact with my family, before I would leave the bedroom, I would wash my hands, I would put on a mask, and then I would go out and maybe I would sit down and eat food at the table. And then after that, when I was done, I would eat the food, I would put it in the sink, I would make sure that anything I touched, which is a very simple area on the table, is just washed, and then I would go back to my room. And so the point is to not have sustained contact with someone in your home who has this disease. You're going to want to take care of them. You're going to want to be in and out of there. How are you doing? Checking their temperature. Don't do it. If you're touching the temperature probe constantly to their mouth, that is where the disease exists. And then you're going to get it on your hands, and then you're going to touch your face. And so you shouldn't be scared to stay at home with your family with a fever if you have COVID-19. The vast majority of people are going to have a fever, body aches, feel like shit for 3 to 5 days, feel a little less shit on 7, and then they're going to start to feel better. You can start interacting with your family more as you feel better, as your fever is gone, but you're still going to be vigilant. You're going to be washing your hands. You're going to be a lot more confident 20 days out from the disease than you are 10 days out from the disease. The current recommendation from the CDC is that if I get sick and if I'm feeling better, I can put on a mask and go to work. And so I think that that is a good indication to you that that's when you can start interacting with your family, is that if you have COVID and you've recovered and you've isolated in your room for 7 days and you've been able to get food, and when you've been with your family, you've worn a mask and you're feeling better, come back out to your family's life, keep a mask on and wash your hands. And so I think that that is a very simple way to do it. I'm about to get to questions. I just want to make a few other small points because this is some stuff that's come up that's relevant in New York City. What do I do if I have a mild cold? And so I think given how rampant COVID-19 is at this point, I think if you have something that feels like a cold or you feel like you're getting sick, is take the precautions like you have COVID-19 for 1 to 2 days. If in 1 to 2 days you're feeling much better, and this is like the 1,000 other colds that you've had in the past year because you have kids, you don't have COVID-19. And then you can go back to your completely normal living at home life with your family. So I think it's just important. The place we get into danger is people being too cavalier when they're developing symptoms and exposing their family too early. And then when they get fevers and they're staying at home, is that they're having too much interaction with your family. You can have COVID-19 in your house and everyone else not get it and be protected and be completely safe. There are a couple exceptions to that, and I think this is important. If you have a vulnerable population in your family, so if you're living with your lovely 95-year-old grandmother, if there's someone in your house who had recent chemotherapy and someone in the house gets sick, you need to find another living arrangement for that patient or practice incredibly, incredibly strict isolation of that family member. We know that the older population is the sickest population when they get this disease. And so that is the one caveat to it's safe to stay home with your family is if you have someone who's incredibly vulnerable, you need to set up a situation in the house where they're completely isolated from the person who is sick. Maybe you could have another person take care of that family member in your house so you have no interaction. But simply being in the home with someone with COVID-19 will not get you that disease. It goes back to the same three principles. It's touching a person or a surface who has COVID-19 and then touching your face. And so lastly, for this, before I get to some of your questions, is when do you go to the hospital? And so I think probably the question that a lot of people are asking is, if I get COVID-19 and I feel short of breath, am I just going to go to the hospital and die? This is where I'm probably the most qualified person in the country to comment on what it looks like when people are coming into the hospital and sick. So first, who should go to the hospital? If you're feeling short of breath, come to the hospital. That is the rule. That is the clearest thing. It's not, I have a fever. It's not, I think I have COVID-19. It's not, I can't stop having those body aches. It's, I feel short of breath when I get up to go to the bathroom. Those are people that should come to the hospital and be evaluated. At Cornell right now, what we're doing is a lot of the people that come to the emergency room, we're sending home to live out the 4 or 5 days of their disease so that they can feel better. And we say, oh, you look completely fine, go home. But what we're also seeing is that people that feel short of breath, who come to the hospital, some of them go onto the floor and just are short of breath for 5 to 6, 7 days, and then they go home. So of the entire population of people who get COVID-19, about 10% need to go to the hospital because they get short of breath. Of the 10% who are coming to the hospital, about 1 to 2 to 3% of those are requiring admission to the ICU and to be put on a ventilator. So what happens when people get put on ventilators? The vast majority of people, overwhelming majority of people, come off the ventilator. And they usually come off the ventilator 7 to 10 days later. But I think the important thing for you guys to know is going to the hospital is not a death sentence. It's a safe place for you to be. Go to the hospital when you're short of breath. Don't go to the hospital just because you have COVID-19. And then I think the question that we're going to get a billion times over, and I don't have a perfect answer for you at this point because it's different in every community, which is, should I get tested if I have the disease? If I'm a generic 35-year-old who's sick, I think it depends on the availability of testing in your community. What we know right now that people are home, is that if you have, and not having a lot of social contact, is that if you have diseases like, if you have symptoms like the flu, it's likely you have COVID-19. And nothing that I've told you about behavior about interacting with your family, a lot of that stuff would change by knowing that test result. The caveat is if your community, whether that's New York or Tennessee, is testing a lot and you have clear access to testing, absolutely getting the test is a good idea. Because when it's negative, then in a day when you're feeling better, you can have full interaction with your family. So I think that is the key. But if you live in a community where there's very rare testing going on at this point, do not try and jump the line to someone who's actually short of breath and really not doing well, just to make yourself feel better, to know that you have it. Just take the precautions in your home that I said, and then as testing ramps up, then we'll be able to get more people tested. So I think I've discussed everything I want to discuss, and so if Dan doesn't have any other suggestions, then I'm going to switch over to questions. And the thing that I think makes a lot of parents, doctor parents in this world, very happy right now is there's almost no COVID disease in the population from age 0 to age 14. So I'll just state that again. Kids are not getting sick. Now, there are some exceptions. You know, there's a recent New England Journal article where they went into a hospital in Wuhan, China, a pediatric hospital, and in the entire hospital of 300 kids, they found 2% of them or 4% of them had COVID, which really looked like cough or asthma. So kids are not dying. Kids are not getting critically ill. Kids are not getting sick. We are wondering, being in a city, is it really safe to go on a run or a walk, taking in the social distancing measures? Amazing question. Yes, please, if you're in a city, you can go outside. Just follow the rules. When you
on the masks, do they have to be even the simple medical mask, or like a bandana, for example?
I think a bandana is, at this point where the doctors and nurses don't have enough face masks, a bandana is a great idea.
Because it keeps your hands off your face. Yeah.
Exactly. These are not preventing you from getting the disease. This is only preventing you from touching your face. This disease is a wimp. Coronavirus is a wimp. It dies as soon as you disinfect it. So I can get back on the exact thing, but just generally any type of disinfectant. And then if you're going out and you don't have Purell, press the elevator with your elbow. You know, open the door with your shoulder. You know, that's not gonna get you COVID. Ideally, if you have Purell, all you need is a small drop. You're gonna kill this thing. This thing doesn't violate the rules. There's not a mystery disease. And so I think that that's a good point. But at Kara, I would like to ask Dave if it is necessary to wipe things like groceries down with disinfectant when bringing them into the house. I think the general answer to that is no. I think that, you know, if you live in New York City, where there's a lot of contact with stuff that you're getting delivered, I think it's a reasonable idea to have the delivery person leave the food that they're delivering to you outside your door. You could probably pick it up with a glove and then just open the bag, and all the inside contents are fine. That's an overabundance of caution, but I think is reasonable. What you don't want to do is high-five the delivery man. You don't want to shake the delivery man's hand. You don't want to pick up the plastic bag that you're getting from Seamless and, you know, have a huge long interaction with that bag, because of course it's possible a delivery person has COVID. But again, if you follow the rules and everything you touch, you just clean your hands, you will not get it. Continue to order food.
You go out and you come home, should you be putting your clothes in the laundromat?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is a recommendation for healthcare providers. Like for me, who I live in rooms with COVID patients, you know, for 12 straight hours. For me, I will take off my clothes and wash them, and I have a whole procedure for that. For people who are generally going out, who are following the rules, wear your clothes. What is amazing now is during the COVID outbreak is the use of telehealth. And so by far, if you feel sick and you're a little nervous, whatever your healthcare provider is, for us, it's, you know, I work for Weill Cornell. We have Weill Cornell Connect. We have an army of doctors who are at home waiting to take your call, who will tell you that you have nothing, or that you have COVID-19 and you should stay home. So do not go to the doctor. Do not go to the hospital. I would encourage you to use telemedicine, which is completely rampant right now because we have a ton of doctors who are at home and will take your call over the internet. Is there clarity about the incubation period if no signs? No, John, I think the incubation period is probably dependent on exposure. And so people who are exposed to a lot of disease, like an emergency room doctor who interacted with a patient for a long period of time without any protection, could be anything from a couple days, to someone who doesn't, who has an interaction with someone with very mild symptoms, and it can be upwards to 14 days, which is where the CDC recommendation is for people to stay home for 14 days. And then there's been the rarest of reports of it being beyond that. So I would say if you had a casual contact with someone and you don't feel sick at 14 days, then you probably are not going to develop COVID disease. Everyone listen, please listen to what I'm going to say. This disease affects everyone who's not in the age group of 0 to 14. So 23-year-olds, 35-year-olds, 45-year-olds with zero medical problems are getting this disease. People like that are coming to the hospital. People like that are going on ventilators. There is a very evil narrative early in this disease that said that this is only a disease of old people and people who have hypertension or people who have diabetes. That is not true. I can tell you because all I do is take care of patients. It hits the entire spectrum of ages. So that includes older people who do worse. We see a little bit more older people, but we see a ton of 35-year-olds. And we will understand it someday, but we don't understand it right now. And so it's not to scare you, just follow the rules. If you can get this disease from age 20 years old, maybe 16 years old, all the way up to age 105, and you can get sick and end up on mechanical ventilation, on a ventilator. The younger you are, the less likely that is to happen. The older you are, the more likely that is to happen. But we see young people who get really sick, and we see old people who do just fine. And so I think it's a great question, Chris. I don't think we know exactly why young people are also getting sick, but it's just to say, follow the rules. Interesting question about ibuprofen. We're not using it in the hospital anymore. There's really good data from Germany that there's worse outcomes in people, more inflammation in people who use ibuprofen. So that's simple answer, which is if you have a fever, take acetaminophen, Tylenol. So don't use ibuprofen, use Tylenol. Hunter, I'd like to hear a bit about what it's like treating these patients. It's actually fascinating because they all look exactly the same. And so everybody has a cough, everybody has a fever. Most people come into the hospital, they sit on the floor and they just have fevers. A lot will be nervous, which is completely understandable. They look like anybody else. What we see for people who get sick is they get short of breath, and then over 1 to 2 to 3 days, they get more short of breath, and then they get so short of breath that they can't walk to the bathroom, and then we put them on a ventilator. And then our experience has been that these people usually settle out over the next 1 day, and then between 7 to 10 days later, barring a complication, we're able to get these people off the ventilator. At Cornell, we're 14 days into this. Our first patient was a 39-year-old who is now home. So he was a 39-year-old who needed mechanical ventilation. He is off mechanical ventilation, and he is safely at home. So I think social distancing will be for months to potentially a year, which I know sounds like a lot, but I think the experience from Wuhan, the experience from Singapore, the experience from South Korea, is that the first thing you do is you flatten the curve. The first thing you do is you bring down the amount of cases so hospitals don't get overwhelmed. And then by human nature, people will become a little relaxed with their social distancing. And so there's then a second small spike. And then after the second small spike, it usually comes under control in the population. And so I think social distancing is something that you need to just put in your brain. I think it's something that is just the way of life for the indefinite future. But now that you know the rules, it's not something to be afraid of. It's just a different way of interacting.
If you are unaware you have the virus during the incubation period, can you infect other people?
I think the answer is yes. And so this comes from the cruise ship data. And so I think there was a concern, a big concern about asymptomatic spread, meaning people who never have symptoms of the disease, spreading it to people who then have symptoms of the disease. What we know from the cruise ship data is that asymptomatic spread, it turns out that most of the people who received the virus from someone else, the person who they received the virus from becomes symptomatic in 1 to 2 days. So it's likely that people who get this disease are shedding the disease 1 to 2 days before they have fever. So what does that mean practically? It means that if you develop COVID-19 and have a fever, know who the people are in your life who you interacted with over the prior 2 to 3 days and let them know. Because then they can follow the rules. They can isolate themselves in their house. They can create a separate bathroom. And then after 2 to 3 to 4 days, if they're not feeling symptoms, they're probably not going to have COVID disease.
And our Christy, who's currently pregnant, is wondering if you've treated any pregnant women, and is it more severe at all in pregnant patients?
I've seen 0 pregnant women in our ICU. I think the data is that they're behaving like any generic person of that age. In other words, we're not seeing it more severe in pregnant women.
Are people becoming immune after they recover?
Yes, people are absolutely becoming immune. The stories you're hearing about people having rebound symptoms is usually the fact that they just haven't fully resolved the disease. So we know that from a day or two before you have the disease until about 14 days into the disease, that you're spreading the disease to the environment. We know that because scientists have done tests of the nose every single day to know which people are going to spread the disease. They don't do it to everyone, but the scientists know who those people are. What they have observed is that at 14 days, people will not be shedding the disease from their nose, but then at day 16, they will be. We don't think that that's because they've relapsed in their disease or not developed immunity. We think it's just because they're slowly coming down and the test is just picking up a little bit. And so the vast majority, so 81,000 people in China got this disease. 76,000 have recovered with antibodies that prevent them from getting the disease. Wow. The natural course of this disease is that once the world sees it, coronavirus now as a pandemic is going to enter the circulation the same way rhinovirus is in our circulation, the same way that respiratory syncytial virus is in our circulation. But as it mutates, it's going to get milder and milder. And so 5 years from now, you're going to get coronavirus, this exact COVID-19, and it's going to feel like a cold. Just not the first time through the population.